Welcome to the newest episode of Inside the Designer's Studio. My name is Veronica Diaz. I'm with Matterhorn Audio, and my co-host and very dear friend is Elliot Goldman from Bending Wave. And before I introduce to the very special guest that we have today, let me remind you that this is the place for us to show you the people behind the brands that you love in audio. Could be sometimes designers, sometimes going to be reviewers, sometimes going to be people who are related in a way or another to the industry. And if you like these videos, please help the channel by liking it and subscribing it. That way you can also get notifications about the new videos that we are creating for you. And without further ado, Elliot, why don't you introduce our very special guest today?
Well, thank you, Veronica, and I want to thank everybody for joining us once again. We do have to apologize a little bit. Both Veronica and I participated in a new show in Seattle, Washington called the Pacific Audio Fest. And for those of you who are not aware of it, these events require a lot of planning and effort, and it kind of threw off our schedule by 2 to 3 weeks, and we're just coming back. So today we have a special guest from across the pond. And this gentleman, who I don't know, I only met a few minutes ago, runs a company called Creekaudio. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Mike Creek and let him tell you a little bit about himself and his company. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Elliot. Hello, Veronica. It's good to be with you tonight. Well, today, your time. What can I say? I've been interested in music since I left school, or perhaps even before I left school. Maybe my history in the audio industry predates even that, because my father was in the industry from the 1940s onwards. So I worked for him for 5 or 6 years before, as a kind of apprenticeship, before I branched out and did my own thing. And a few years later, when in a sort of period of flux of the economy, I found myself needing to do something different. I started Creekaudio in 1982 and launched a new product, which was called the 4040. Not so dramatic as it was sort of at the time. Lots of products around that time were numbered that way, with the NAD 3020, etc., etc. But I knew how successful they were. I wouldn't say I copied them. In fact, I never even took a look inside it, but I knew the target audience, which was younger people. My target was to find customers who were short of funds, and also short of space. So my product was as small as it was possible to make an amplifier in those days and provide enough power and enough performance to satisfy even the most discerning hi-fi critic. At that time, I was so interested in hi-fi that I'd spent every spare dime I had buying hi-fi equipment or stereo equipment, to the exclusion of more or less everything else. So it was natural that I thought that I could make something better than I could buy. So I started off with something which was much more complicated and perhaps bells and whistles, and featured too much on the front of it. So the 4040 was the diametric opposite, in the fact that it was a sort of a fairly small, bland looking product with 4 knobs and 5 or 6 buttons on the front, and one single solitary LED. That was, as I said, 40 years ago, which is quite a long time now. We're celebrating our 40th year as Creekaudio in the industry, and over that time we've had our ups and our downs, and we've sold to many countries around the world and to nearly all of the retail customers in the UK that existed, some of whom sadly now don't exist any longer. They've either closed down through retirement. Somebody close to our industry closed only this last week due to retirement, and the change from bricks and mortar selling to maybe the online approach to selling, which is almost exclusive now to our industry. So that's a little bit of history for the background of me and my company.
Yeah,
I don't know that that's a good thing that we gone to online, because I still believe we're in an experience-based industry, and the things that differentiate one product from another are generally not things that people read on a piece of paper, but rather that they experience and get some kind of emotional reaction. Can I, Mike, since we don't know each other, are you an engineer by education, or how did you, I think a lot of people that design audio product have the same inspiration that you did, that I could do better than that, but were you an engineer by background?
My father was. Neither of those things, I would say, but more of an entrepreneur, I guess. He started a business with £50, say $75, which he borrowed from my mother. He'd been in the Royal Air Force as a wireless operator and air gunner. And when he left with a few pounds in his pocket from his pension or his sort of pay from that, from being released in 1947, I think it was, he started buying and selling components wholesale. And at that point in time, he decided that the hot topic was reel-to-reel tape recorders. So he was amongst the first in the UK to build a reel-to-reel tape recorder, because before that time only wire recorders were available, and certainly for the broadcast industry that's what they used. So when I started out in his business in 1969, he'd just finished making tape recorders because they'd been taxed by the government to oblivion as a kind of a luxury product. So we got into it, or I got into the business, not as an engineer, but as just an ordinary employee, just at the moment in time when transistors and integrated circuits were taking over from tubes and from tape recorders, from reel-to-reel tape recorders specifically. So I would say that I learned a lot from my father, but never studied engineering as a topic educationally. I passed a few exams, including science and things like that, but it's very broad. Most of my experience comes from practically working with and manufacturing products in a factory, which was a family-run business. And I suppose it's something common these days where you either go to university and study for 4 or 5 years and come out with a degree in something you wished you'd never studied at the beginning, if you had a chance. Well, I got into something that perhaps I wanted to, and used that as an excuse for avoiding an education or a further education. So I was more practical than scientific, but nevertheless, I had lots of people around me to teach me. And that also came about with the fact that I had an experience of tinkering with electronics well before I went out to work. So it was in my blood, it's in my father's and my brother's in the same electronics industry, not audio, but in security electronics. And he worked with my father for a lot longer than I did, in fact, until the time of his death. Mm-hmm. But he didn't want to be in the audio business. I tried to encourage him, but he didn't have the feeling for it that I did. So I experienced what it was like to run my own business as a consultant engineer, designing things for other companies. Now, without any degrees or qualifications, paper qualifications, I managed to bluff my way into doing work for even Philips Semiconductors, building or designing circuit boards for them so that they could promote their electronic components. Amongst other things, I worked in radio and in audio for a lot longer than perhaps I should have done before getting back into manufacturing again myself. But
And that's
perhaps I had an excuse, which was when I left my father's business, which employed a lot of people, I vowed never to employ anyone ever again. But it's soon had to change.
Hey, Mike, your brand is known worldwide. And for many people in the US, they know your brand, especially the Evo line and the Evolution line was super popular in the US. And I got to know you with a new line, which is the Voyage line, which is, I think, is a huge improvement from my perspective from the previous line. What I like about your brand is that the kind of amplification and DAC and CD that allows me to play music, hear the details, be really in the high-end side of the listening without having to pay the high-end prices. But I would like to hear your perspective. What made you change so much your line from something that would be more in the introductory pricing for the high-end industry to something that is really more into what people are used to have in
Well,
mid
that's a good question. The truthful answer is that it wasn't deliberate. It was always my ambition to manufacture an amplifier using a power supply that was stabilized or voltage regulated, so that the power supply was no longer a component that varied in the sense that you could tune the amplifier with the quality of the power supply, the quality being how much it varied according to how loud you played something or how dynamic the music was. I wanted it to be a fixed constant. And so after many years of experimentation, we came up with a power supply first, which is essentially how amplifiers work. You know, without a power supply, you've got no way to amplify anything. And we made versions of this power supply for a powered loudspeaker, first of all, initially to miniaturize the power supply requirements. But it soon became clear to us that with certain limitations that we were forced to have to play with, that stabilizing it or regulating the power or the voltage especially was important for us for the powered speaker application, because I had another company called EPOS, which I have recently sold to a German customer. I think you also import their products, Fink. Now, without going into too many details about the powered speaker, I would say that it was a stepping stone to developing a bigger and a better power supply for audio amplification, which could be shrunk to a footprint or a size that wouldn't be dreamt of if you were using low frequency or linear power supplies. Mm-hmm. Now that's essentially the background of what started the development of this product into the Voyage. The Voyage was my son's idea, Luke. I had called it something else, which he thought was less attractive. So I think he came up with the form and the function of it, which was, I would say, simple to look at, yet although elegant and functional in the same time. So he hated the idea of having so many buttons on the front that we had with Evolution. So he kind of encouraged me to evolve something that got rid of all those function buttons and absorbed them into push button rotary controls. So as you know, it has just a left and a right control, rotary and push button, and a complex menu system. Now, I wouldn't say that would incur greater costs. In fact, leaving out the buttons should reduce the cost. But each step of the way we went, it forced us to invent new ideas and new technical solutions to problems that we didn't think we would have had before. Now, we'd also previously developed, and are still one of the few audio companies using Class G amplification techniques. Well, to be precise, it's not an amplification technique, it's a power supply technique used to allow a linear amplifier to be more powerful yet waste less heat. So it enabled us to reduce the physical size of the amplifier without reducing the quality or the power output or the efficiency. So essentially it's a regular amplifier with a few tricks up its sleeve. And the biggest trick, I think, is the Class G operation, which requires multiple power supplies to operate efficiently, well, without too much heat wasted, and therefore big, heavy and expensive heat sinks. But the power supply itself was a unique and integral part of that. There's no doubt that we could do it with a linear power supply, as we did with the Evolution 100A, but the trick was doing it with a switching power supply, which moreover was using a technique that we call resonant converter. So a resonant converter, as opposed to a more conventional quasi-resonant converter, fixes the output voltage independently of the load. So we could guarantee under any circumstances, under any mains conditions, and with any output load conditions, exactly what the power output would be. And it never changes until you reach the maximum that the power supply is designed to work with, and only then does it start dropping. So let's say, for example, a 100-watt amplifier into 8 ohms, both channels can be producing 200 watts into 4 ohms, both channels, or 400 watts into 2 ohms, both channels. It doesn't vary. It doubles as you in power as you halve the load impedance. And this was the sort of the goalpost that we had, and the cost of doing these things and the implication of introducing better quality preamplifier circuitry and volume controls, and the additional costs of the casework, which are made in Europe and not like the Evolution made in China, brought us to a price that perhaps is higher than we'd expected. It isn't by any means ludicrously expensive, but it's only when you hear it, you've got to believe it, that it's a serious contender for high end.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Mike. Well, now we're going to start with other type of questions that are more trivia.
Okay.
Right? Elliot, why don't you come with the first question?
So Mike, tell me, what sound do you love?
Pardon?
What? Okay, I got a wise guy here. That high English sense of humor. What sound do you love?
Well, I would say my preference is for a smoother sound, which I would equate to low distortion, but not at the expense of dynamics or at the expense of other qualities. So I think that if you listen to the Voyage amplifier, it epitomizes what I like. Unfortunately, we're no longer able to make, oh look, I've changed color.
That's some sun.
Yeah, I've changed to a different color, red.
Right.
But anyway, we used to manufacture lots of products for 20 years with power MOSFETs. And they had a silky quality about them, which was difficult to replicate using bipolar transistors. So you could say that although my family history is in making tube amplifier products, I would say that I've never tried, never wanted to. My interest has been in semiconductors. So that kind of sound is dominated by a different kind of distortion. And that different type of distortion we try to nullify or mask by techniques which never have prompted me to go towards Class A, but we do our best to make our amplifiers as linear as possible with as low amount of negative feedback as possible. So we aim for it to be neutral. That's right. Neutral, smooth, dynamic. I think that about sort of explains it, really.
Well, it explains. It's not really what I was asking, but it does explain it. You know, like what I meant by that is, like, for example, if you would ask me what sound do I love, I would say to you something like, I love the sound of an acoustic guitar.
Okay, right. Well, that's
I'm really trying to get out of the technical stuff.
okay, great.
Everybody wants to build something that sounds like real music and it's neutral, but let's talk personally. What sound do you love?
Well, musically, my love.
It could be anything. You could tell me the sound of the ocean. I'm just trying to get
well, I could say my car.
That's cool. That's cool.
That's great.
I have hobbies outside the audio industry, which include restoring and maintaining classic cars. So loud engines, exhaust systems.
I owned hot rods as a kid. I love the sound of a V8 engine. I mean, it's
oh, well, yeah. Well, mine are not V8s, but they're certainly loud. In fact, these days I used to I use ear defenders when driving them because
what kind of car are you talking about?
Mini Cooper S
Okay.
from the 60s. So I have about 5 or 6 of them, and they range from a sort of 60-year-old Cooper to a 55-year-old Cooper S. Well, no, wait, the youngest one is 1971 Cooper S. So that's as young as they get for me.
Well, I grew up with English Roadsters also. I mean,
All right.
I had an MGB, I had an Austin Healey, I had stuff like that as a kid, and I still love that kind of stuff, but they don't really make those kind of cars much anymore. So
No.
Also,
I
let me guess.
have an MGB too, but I didn't want to talk about that.
So let me guess, if I ask you what's the sound that you hate, you're going to tell me that it's the sound of a broken tire or something like that.
Oh, no, definitely no.
What is the sound that you hate?
Broken anything is anathema to me, but I have to be honest that music always appealed to me. I have an eclectic taste, if we can't say that's an overused term, but I suppose when I was late teens, early 20s, I was into rock music. So the traditional music of the time was, well, coming out of the UK was Led Zeppelin, Cream, Jimi Hendrix even, because he kind of found his feet over here, that kind of thing. So when I was at boarding school in the 60s, I had a music system which my father had built for me. And I used to entertain myself and my friends by playing anything that we could buy, anything that was, funky at the time.
Right.
And mostly it was rock music.
Going every Friday or Saturday to the record store and cashing that $10 bill in for 2-3
Well, it was like that. Yeah. Well, we had to walk in days that we were allowed it to escape from the, the prison that was our school. We go down into town, and I think I bought my first Jimi Hendrix recording down there in '67, and it was probably
Are you experienced, Mike?
absolutely, yeah. In fact, I have that very recording here.
There we go.
Now I am trying to picture you two guys as rockers, like with your long hair and just.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I once used to have hair, but yeah, it's more streamlined now.
I guess we're close to the same age, but the difference then and now is that, first of all, I can't speak for the UK, but in the US, I grew up where there was like 13 channels of shit on television, and there really wasn't a lot to do. And so the big things for us, like I lived in New York, was listening to progressive radio stations like WNEW or WPLJ. And in the 60s, particularly around 67, you had this influx into the US of the UK bands like Zeppelin and Jethro Tull and Elton John and all this stuff. And then you would hear this stuff on the radio and go down to the record store, and albums then, okay, because there were no CDs and there was no streaming. I used to buy, I think it was like 4 albums for about $10, okay? And then you'd go home and then you'd have this album in front of you. And this was a big deal because the art from the album and the liners in the album, and you could see the lyrics, and it was usually a story. Like, I'm a big Tull fan, always was. So their albums, like thick as a brick, looked like a newspaper, and it folded up, and there were all these different articles, and you could spend 2-3 days just exploring all of that stuff. So it was a big deal, and you had to go to the local record store, and that's where you did it. Nobody walked around. People had headphones, but they didn't walk around outside with headphones. And so that LP was really an emotional thing. It was, it really, I don't know what other word to use. It was this piece of information that was being transferred to you, that you could go home and people would listen to these records ad nauseum to hear the secret messages and all kinds of other stuff. But rock and roll changed the world. I mean, you can talk about it if you want. Rock and roll changed the world. And in the 60s with Vietnam, and the 70s with the racial riots and all the rest of this stuff, this was our lifeline to the feelings of other teenagers and young people around the world.
Well, I agree. In fact, a second album, which I was prompted to buy while I was, how should we say, resting was the right word, resting outside of a nightclub after friends had gone in there, and I found it a little bit boring. And I was listening to music at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they just played for the first time Freeform Guitar by Chicago Transit Authority. And this isn't the exact copy, but I do have that. But this is a sort of a newer pressing. But that prompted me into listening to more fusion, which was that jazz rock fusion, which, if you listen to the recording quality now, it doesn't stand much scrutiny. And in fact, I don't know why it was so variable, but I was both interested in the music content and also the reproduction of it. So as I said earlier, as soon as I could start investing in audio equipment, I bought it.
We like the same things. I still use CTA. I still play beginnings, and you know, you talk about they were a very different band because they were all really serious musicians. They weren't just kids that practiced in a basement.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you're talking about one of the great guitar players that ever lived, and an incredible band. These are all very serious music students, and I was fortunate enough, and you were probably too, we grew up in the era where we saw all the great bands. I mean, there's very few people that I did not get to see.
Well, I was lucky enough to see Jethro Tull play locally where I lived. So,
Right.
yeah.
Saw them 20 times. But the
Mm.
fact is, other than maybe Stevie Ray Vaughan and the Beatles, I saw everybody. And
Mhm.
first of all, they played at universities and they played at theaters, and it wasn't, the stadium stuff came much, much later. So I assume in around the UK too, they played at high schools and colleges and small clubs. And I saw Cream the first time in a club in Boston called the Psychedelic Supermarket. And it was maybe, I'm guessing 300 people there. I don't even know. Eric Clapton spent the whole show with his back to the audience. And I didn't, by the way, I didn't know who they were. I had
Yep.
no idea who they were, you know? And you had these three guys playing solo all at the same time. And it was a really exciting time. And music was so much, and I don't want to call it more important. It was so much more a part of our life on a daily thing, because we didn't have the internet and we didn't have cable TV and we didn't have a lot of other distractions. Okay, it was listen to music, get high, and have sex. I mean, that's kind of what the 60s and 70s were. And I'm surprised we don't know each other, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm surprised you haven't met her. I've been to
I
Las
mean,
Vegas
remember the
and
NAD.
other
You
shows.
should listen to his stuff. It's really good. And Mike, if you weren't doing what you are doing, what other profession would you have picked?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe something in the medical profession, perhaps.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
surprised.
A surgeon.
If you were gonna say a race car driver.
No.
Interesting.
I wasn't so academic to be able to pass the exam, so I struggle with dyslexia. So this was a perfect album because it's back to front. You know, the back is the front.
Yep.
That's the correct way up, but this is kind of weird.
It's a true masterpiece, actually. So, Mike, do you have an idol or a hero in the audio industry?
You're talking about a designer stroke
Somebody that influenced you,
ambassador for
somebody
the.
that you looked up to or have special feelings for?
Well, that's pushing it.
Yeah.
Perhaps of recent years, Tim the Paravicini is somebody I got to know quite well and chatted with a lot and shared, you know, time on aircraft and restaurants and things. I mean, he's sadly no longer with us, but he was such a knowledgeable guy and had an incredible memory. He was certainly influential in some respects, but actually my father was the most influential person, I would say. Trying to impress him was almost impossible. So, you know, that was a strong encouragement for me to try harder.
God, we could have been brothers from another mother. I'll tell you something. Pleasing my father was a nice man. I'm not saying he wasn't, but nothing I ever did pleased my father.
Yeah.
If I played baseball and went out and pitched a no-hitter and hit 4 home runs, he would have found something that I did wrong. You know, it's and not in a bad way. It's just it was impossible for him, I guess, from his generation too, to like say, "Good job, you did a good job."
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I started my own business, and he wasn't impressed. You know, my mother thought that I was going to be destitute, and he just thought, you know, he's trying to be me. Well, I certainly probably was encouraged by what he was able to achieve from so little so quickly, and perhaps I'll never emulate that. But he meant well. It was just, as you said, the people of that generation felt very it was difficult for them to express emotions in a way that we would hug our kids or our grandkids now. And I think the closest he came to physical contact was shaking my hand. You know, that was as close as we got, you know, so.
Mine was punching me in the arm, but.
I think that there was just a different way to express their love. I mean, they had,
Yeah,
if
definitely.
you go historically, those are generations that either they lived the war in their countries, or they were just living the tension of and the consequences of the war. So they had to be tough.
Well, that's profound. You're
And
profoundly right in that respect. My father suffered from PTSD, and although he did nothing but fly during the war, he never flew again afterwards because it ended with a crash. And the crash, he never got over it enough to be able to.
Airplane crash too. Unbelievable.
Oh my God.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
But you know what I think it is too, if you look at it, and I'm kind of a student of certain things and certainly a master of none. But the fact is that when you go back and you look at, and you and I are contemporaries, if you look at the way things were presented to us in the media in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it's very different than today. You know, the fact is, like, when you watch television then, people didn't hug and they didn't do this, and none of that stuff was shown on screen, and everything was very formal, and there was none of this huggy, whatever it is. There was a tremendous amount of sexual innuendo, but just innuendo. And there certainly was no sexual variety. Okay, you know, people couldn't have their feet off the floor and in bed. They couldn't be undressed. They would never talk
about TV in the States is very much like that. Yeah.
Right. There was no alternative thought process or no discussing alternative life, you know, ways or any of that stuff. It was all buttoned up and square and whatever it is. And I think that it absolutely affects the attitudes and behaviors of the people that live in those populations, because this is what you see. I mean, we are, whether we like it or not, we're influenced by celebrities and news and contemporaries. And when people behave that way, it's difficult to behave outside of that way.
Yeah, and look, if to think about what is happening right now, so you come from a generation, I come from a different generation, and there's a newer generation out there. So let's be compassionate about how they are and they taste and the way they tick and the way they listen to music, because everything is valid. We are in this world for such a short time. Let's have the best experience that we can have. Let's be happy and let's understand each other and why we, where do we come from? Where are we going? And if there's anything to change because we think that definitely something is wrong, then let's share it and let's speak about. And maybe we need to learn how to communicate with the newer generations so they can listen and they can understand the way we needed to understand our parents and our parents needed to understand us. And then we just create a more harmonious world. And maybe there are many less problems, but maybe I'm just a dreamer. But I'm not.
Probably a song like that somewhere.
I'm gonna cry now. Okay.
California Dreamer, yeah. Or California Dreaming, should I say?
Right. So, well, now I'm gonna ask you something completely trivial, right? I don't know if that affects you or your products or not, but people talk a lot here in the US about the wife factor. Like, oh, everything has to be, oh, I have to check with my wife if she likes it, if she likes how much I'm gonna spend, if it fits in the decoration. Is that for you a true thing, or you just think it's excuse? Or
well, I know it is the wife acceptance factor.
Yeah, that the wife factor, wife acceptance factor.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, when I started creekaudio, I had a wife. She's no longer around, as in dead.
You choose audio. You choose audio over the wife. So that's the answer.
I'm sorry?
You choose audio over the wife, and that's the answer. No, I'm just kidding. I'm so sorry.
No, misunderstand me. No, I'm just saying that she was influential in me doing what I did because I wouldn't say she encouraged me, but she didn't discourage me. my parents actively discouraged me, saying, "You've seen how difficult it is for your father. Why would you ever dream of doing such a thing?" And the more they said that, the more I was determined to do the opposite, which is obviously something they hadn't learned the reverse psychology of. But my wife, Susan, she definitely encouraged me.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
I mean, we were together for 10 years. And during most of those 10 years, she was my biggest fan. So yeah, it was great.
Beautiful. Elliot.
Mike, what do you think is the biggest myth in audio?
Misunderstanding, I guess. What myth? Well, that one needs 384, 700 odd kilohertz sample rates in digital audio and music reproduction. This is a myth. That people's hearing is limited to a certain dynamic range, and our ability to be able to appreciate differences is also limited in many respects, far below that of the ultimate quality of so-called modern recording techniques. So I think it's a myth to be chasing specifications that make little or no difference. Sound quality is what's important. And if I've ever made a product where I haven't listened to it, it would be a failure. So I could be accused, and some have accused me of being too fussy and not letting anything out that I wasn't 100% happy with, or at least 90% happy with, because it's almost impossible to achieve everything that you're setting yourself as a goal. But the myth that you can achieve some kind of audio nirvana by chasing ridiculously high quality sample rates and bit rates, or the fact that vinyl recordings can give you this kind of sound quality experience, when we know that the dynamic range, stereo separation, and all of these other factors is a fraction of what modern digital recording would be. So, it's just, I suppose one has to be careful not to be critical, because it's like biting the hand that feeds you. But editorial comments can be scathing sometimes, and often not come from the right direction, not from the knowledge or the experience of what it takes to achieve a result. So I have to say that people should always test and try, or taste and try for themselves. The myth that somebody is more knowledgeable because they work in an audio store, or that they write for a magazine or something, present company accepted, of course, that they've got some kind of extrasensory perception that the average consumer or audiophile or just music lover has of themselves. They just have to search for it. They'll find it within themselves. So the myth is perhaps that the consumer is ignorant. They're not. They know what they like.
I agree with you. I think that what people don't want to talk about, and I've actually been talking about this in a forum, is that I think listening is a learning thing. Just like you learn, or you can educate, it's a better word, you can educate your taste buds, you can educate your ears, and it is a skill, and it's a skill that can be practiced and learned. However, having said that you're in the UK, I'm in the US, Veronica grew up in Mexico. There's another factor that people don't talk about, and it's experience and opportunity. So someone living in Asia would have completely different experiences and opportunities than, say, someone living in California or in London. And it does affect what we like and what our expectations are when we listen. I mean, even the fact that we listen to different music. If you somebody that likes hard rock and roll, your expectations and maybe what you're looking for in audio is different than somebody that listens to chamber music. And everybody wants to fight and butt heads that, like, you know, I'm right and you're wrong. And they all want to pick up some kind of hook to hang their thing on. You know, it's got a plutonium tweeter, and it's got MOSFET this, and it's got a linear power supply, and it's got, and there is no, we found out that those answers really don't exist. You know, because you come up with a technical advance does not necessarily mean it's a sonic advance. And as we all realize, and you just said, nothing's perfect. We've come a long way. I think there's an amazing amount of really excellent sounding product that's produced today. And when incorporated into an environment properly and set up properly, does an amazing job. Is it perfect? Of course not.
No, it's just an approximation.
Well, I hope we could do better than that, but yes.
Well, if you go to a live concert, as I did recently, I went to, you probably heard, the Royal Albert Hall in
Yes.
London. It's just round the corner to where my son lives. And coincidentally, we were both attending a concert there, although neither of us knew that we were doing it. And we ended up being invited by somebody who had a box. Now, these boxes in the Royal Albert Hall are unbelievably expensive luxury items. But when they're not being used, they're of little use to the owner of that box. I think they buy the space and they can rent out the space to other people or use it themselves. But I was very fortunate to be invited into the box and share the experience there. We saw A Saucer Full of Secrets playing there, which, as you know, is Nick Mason's band. Right. And he played all of the pre-70s Pink Floyd music. And the light show and the sound quality was unbelievable. And fortunately, not too loud. I think that's the other myth. The loudness wars hadn't got the better of them. He was actually playing amplified drums. So I presume for a person of his years, it was easier to get the sound right without having to have the physicality involved, perhaps what he had used in the past. So that experience wasn't brilliant for the first number that they played. My son and I looked at each other and just shook our heads and said that was a bit underwhelming. And obviously the guys at the mixing desk had the same feeling, but didn't want to change it mid track. So they changed it for the second track. And then from then onwards, it was fantastic. Mm. But again, is that real or is it engineered? It's, as I said, there's nothing perfect, nothing you couldn't actually say, is that the way it is meant to be, unless you're sitting in front of something. And then again, one of the other things is that we listen to music via electronics. We listen, most of what we listen to is room acoustics, and we haven't actually touched on that subject, but room acoustics, in my view, is almost more important than the reproduction equipment. Mm. Getting that right is super important.
Yeah. And Mike, how do you see your company in the next 5 years growing? What are your plans?
Well, my plans for the next months and years is to perhaps go back a little bit to my roots. So it's 40th anniversary. So I've been, for the last year or two, researching and studying what I could do to replicate the success we had with the first product, which we've never sold so many as the first product that we made. So, you know, one would always like to have a second opportunity to make a good first impression. And, you know, one would only dream of doing that now. But so I almost by accident stumbled across something which prompted me to this year start developing a smaller product, smaller even than the original 4040 product that we introduced in 1982. So first time out was in the Munich high-end show, but this is my baby. So this is half width. That's
The voyage.
what would you call it? It's half of 43 centimeters, so 215 millimeters. It's sort of lightweight. It weighs 2 kilos, like 4 pounds, you know.
Wow.
And it has
Are you going to put anything in the box?
yeah.
I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you.
So there we are.
Right.
This is the entire circuitry.
Wow.
And that's a 2 by 50 watt amplifier into 8 ohms. It will achieve 150 watts into 2 ohms. You can see these BMW monsters behind me, which sync to less than 1 ohm at certain frequencies. I use it to drive them. Not saying it's going to be the best performance. I mean, the Voyage will leave it standing, but it's horses for courses, you know. This little amplifier can sit on top of one of these loudspeakers easily, and it could be a desktop amplifier in your home office. It could be the center of anyone's system, because it's fully equipped with every digital input you would want. It's not got network streaming, but it's not something that could be you know, a complication. So you could add that discreetly. So it has the wife acceptance factor that you were talking about before, because it simplifies the wiring incredibly, and it's small and discreet. In fact, my close friends of mine who live in London at the moment are moving closer to where I live out in the countryside, and they want to simplify their system, which is a Creek Epos system. And the guy's an American, lives in London, and his partner is Brazilian, and they're both doctors of science, different types of science, but they've always been fans of Creek and Epos, and I'm helping them to establish their next audio system, which has got to be smaller, more discreet, but no less dramatic to listen to.
Beautiful.
I'm a huge streaming guy. I really believe in what streaming can do. And I think that that's a way to really bring more and more people into our industry, is to simplify it. And at the same time, with things like Qobuz and Tidal, you give them the whole world of music right here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right here. It's incredible. And I've found more new music, and old music for that matter, in the last 2 years than probably my whole life together. You know, from just having these services that I can screw around in and look in, or they even recommend things to me. You know, you're listening to Zeppelin and maybe you never heard of, you know, whatever, Savoy Brown or something, and all of a sudden it goes, why don't you try this?
Yes, well, that random approach to, you like that music, so what about this, has
Right.
actually introduced me to some things that I wouldn't have ever found out before.
Right.
Well, in a way, is what the radio used to do for you, right?
Well, that's what the radio did. The radio, when I used to listen at night to the radio, the DJs would say, hey, this new band just came over from London, and let me see what you know, see if you like it. And it was like, whatever, like I said, whether it was Peter Frampton or Humble Pie or Wild Turkey or I don't know, there's a million of them. And you sit there, well, hey, that's pretty good. And then you went out and bought the record.
Well, it's exactly what prompted me to get into it as well. And radio, when I was growing up, we were kind of limited because from its earliest beginnings, the government decided to license one company, the British Broadcasting Corporation, or BBC, and gave them the power to control essentially everything that people listened to or what they were able to hear.
Right.
And that was essentially hand in hand with union power over what bands were allowed to play. So foreign bands used to have to get, I guess, like American music coming over was greatly appreciated, but it was restricted because of visas and union restrictions on what bands could do or what they could play. They were afraid for their own jobs in case somebody should be better than them, which was a shame. But you know, my upbringing was music. My father was a musician. I didn't mention that, but he played piano. He could play the drums. He could sing. He was a very good Danny Kaye impersonator. He was a comedian. He was very good at. If he hadn't got into the electronics business, he perhaps would have been in the entertainment business.
Very interesting.
That's super cute.
Hmm.
I love that story. Elliot, why don't you wrap this interview up?
Okay, well, I had a really nice time meeting somebody I haven't met before, and
Likewise.
my brother from another mother from across the ocean, because we had a very similar experiences, maybe not growing up, but as children of the 60s and 70s. I have to admit that I didn't know an awful lot about, I know the name creekaudio. I'm trying to remember if I've ever had the opportunity to really play with it. I know Veronica's shown it to me at a show, but I'll have to do a little exploration. And for those viewers that are looking for something that a little smaller and perhaps a little bit more affordable, this is a product that, after meeting this gentleman, I have a lot of curiosity, and I hope you do. So I want to thank Mike for joining us, and hopefully we can meet again or do this again in the future. And I want to thank my lovely co-host for arranging this, and hope you all will subscribe to our channel and come back really soon.
Thank you, gentlemen. It has been a pleasure and has been very moving and inspiring and fun talking to you too. And I'm looking forward for the next episode that we're going to record and the next opportunity to talk to you, fortunately in person. For all the viewers, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you soon.